The Fujifilm X-S10 is a very user-friendly camera that has the beginner user in mind. It's very easy to just switch this camera on and start taking great images, but that's not to say that it isn't capable of much more. Quite the opposite. You will find almost all the major features in Fujifilm's higher-end bodies within the X-S10. There is so much you can customize to really personalize this camera to tailor to your needs. And in this video, I will be going over with you my settings for the X-S10 with street photography in mind. Just remember that the settings I'm about to show you should serve only as a base. Everyone has different methodologies, so make sure to experiment and tweak any settings to best suit your personal needs. So let's get started. The first few settings I consider compulsory, at least for street photography. In the menus, let's go down to the wrench icon and find sound setup. To remain discreet, it is important to turn off as much of the camera's operational sounds as possible. AF beep volume controls the sound you hear when you half press the shutter in certain focus modes to orally notify you that the camera has acquired focus successfully. We want that to be off. Operation volume should be off by default. If it is not, set it to off. Shutter volume controls the loudness of the shutter sound. This camera has two shutter types, mechanical and electronic. The mechanical shutter is a physical shutter that opens and closes in front of the camera and will obviously make a sound whenever it is activated. The electronic shutter, on the other hand, does not make any noises. Therefore, you have the option of setting a fake shutter sound as an audible register whenever you take a shot with the electronic shutter. In shutter volume, by turning it off, you will no longer hear the fake shutter noise. Finally, if we move out of the sound setup to screen setup and navigate to focus scale units, we are able to select our preferred method of measurement. Select either meters or feet depending on your preference. Just by changing those settings, it will make the X-S10 much more confident to use on the streets. But now let's start from the top of the menu and work our way down. Before we do that, set the camera to M on the PSAM dial, as this will allow you to make changes to every setting in the menu. The settings we are about to change will carry across to every other mode except for the custom C1 to C4. So, starting off in the IQ tab. Image size will specify the file size of JPEG images and aspect ratio of the photo taken. The box with the letters L, M, and S indicate the resolution of the JPEG image produced. The grey bar at the bottom of the screen will show you the pixel dimensions and approximate file size of the JPEG file. The native aspect ratio on the X-S10 is 3:2. That is the full coverage of the sensor, viewfinder, and rear LCD. Changing it to 16:9 or 1:1 will only affect how you see the image through the viewfinder and LCD, and only apply to JPEG images and not RAW files. I have mine set to small 3:2 as I save out the image on both JPEG and RAW, and I only use the JPEGs on my social media, so I don't really need the file size and dimensions to be too large. If you like to crop your JPEG images, then I would recommend setting it to either L or M. Okay. Now image quality specifies what you want to save your image out as. You have the option of saving out the image as a JPEG image with either fine or normal image quality, or saving out a JPEG in fine or normal and a RAW file. Or you can choose to only save a RAW file. I choose fine and RAW for the best quality JPEG file, and a RAW file just in case I wish to edit more extensively in my photo editing program. Do note that if you select RAW only, if you select Auto, SP, or Filter modes on the dial, it will default to Fine plus RAW, as it does not support RAW only capture. RAW recording relates to your RAW files. If you only wish to shoot JPEGs, you can skip this section. If you shoot RAW, I would only recommend setting it to lossless uncompressed over any other option because, put simply, you retain all the information as you would in an uncompressed file, but greatly reducing the file size. So it's a win-win. Finally, let's go to color space. By default, it is set to sRGB. However, if you are somebody who wants to print JPEG photos straight out of camera, Adobe RGB is the pick for better color reproduction. Otherwise, stick to sRGB. Now onto the AF+MF tab. Navigate to AF+MF. I like to have it on. What this does is when you shoot AF-S mode, when you half press the shutter and the camera acquires focus, while holding the shutter halfway, or if you are back button focusing and hold down the back focus button, you are able to turn the focus ring on your lens to manually fine-tune the focus before fully depressing the shutter button. This really depends on the lens you choose to shoot with and how much degree of control you want. Some lenses are faster and more reliable at autofocus than others. Next is MF Assist. By default, it is set to standard, but I highly recommend switching over to Focus Peak Highlight and setting the color to Red High. This makes it so much easier to check what is in focus, as the more intense the red outline is, the more in focus it is. MF Assist will engage when you turn the focus ring if you have MF plus AF turned on. It will also work if you are shooting in manual focus mode. Focus check is optional. What it does is, as soon as you turn the focus ring, the viewfinder or LCD will zoom in on the position of your focus box so you can really fine-tune and nail focus. If you are in manual focus mode, half pressing the shutter will exit out of the zoom. However, if you are shooting in AF-S mode, once you turn the focus ring, there is no way to exit the zoom unless you release back button focus or the shutter button. Next, release focus priority. I have AF-S and AF-C both set to release. If set to focus, if you fully depress the shutter button without a half press, the camera will still try to acquire focus before taking a shot. If set to release, fully depressing the shutter will force the camera to take a shot, irrespective of whether it has acquired focus. Finally, touchscreen mode. Let's set it to off. If you look at your LCD display, near the top right side, there is a gray tab. By default, it is set to shot. This means if I press somewhere on the LCD screen, the camera will acquire focus and take a shot. This might be a bit annoying if you accidentally press the screen by accident, so I set it to off by default, and if I wish to, I can always change it by tapping on the gray tab to cycle through the touch options. Okay, now onto the shooting settings. For photometry, I have it set to spot metering. This means it will adjust the exposure of the scene to ensure whatever is inside the focus box is properly exposed. There are other options to choose from, so give them a try and find the best mode for you. Shutter type I have set to mechanical plus electronic. The mechanical shutter can work up to 1/4000th of a second, and the electronic shutter can operate up to 32,000ths of a second. The main benefit of having both active is in case you are in a bright situation where your aperture is already at a high value, or you either do not want to sacrifice increasing aperture value, the extra 3 stops of the electronic shutter may save your day. The drawback to electronic shutter is it will not sync with flash, and if you and/or your subject is moving very quickly, the inherent properties of the electronic shutter may cause unnatural subject distortion. If you know you are only shooting slow-moving subjects and wish to be as discreet as possible, consider shooting only in electronic shutter. Flicker reduction will aid in reducing banding caused by artificial lighting at certain shutter speeds. I have it set to first frame. Finally, ISO. I have a video on this topic which you can check out here. Otherwise, I have only 2 settings. Auto 1 default sensitivity at 160, max sensitivity at 3200, and minimum shutter speed at 1/250th of a second. Auto 2 default sensitivity at 160, max at 12,800, and minimum shutter at 1/60th of a second. Finally, let's go down to the settings tab and go into button dial settings and focus lever setting. Now, push by default is set to zoom, so while shooting, if I press down on the joystick, it will zoom into the area where the focus box was positioned. I changed it to edit focus area because on my X100V and most other Fujifilm cameras, pressing down on the joystick allows you to edit the size of the focus box. tilt by default is edit focus area, but since I have assigned that to push, I'm going to change it to direct AF point selection / face select. This allows me to tilt the joystick and move the focus box around, or if eye face detect is activated and there is more than one face detected in the scene, you can tilt the joystick to switch between the two faces. Edit Save Quick menu with the camera icon. Now I have this set to 8 slots, and in order I have focus mode, AF mode, highlight tone, shadow tone, dynamic range, flash, and shutter type. This obviously works for me, but you may want to play around and figure out what's best for you. The function settings I only changed for the 4 directional swipe functions you can customize for the LCD. FN1 is assigned to Performance Boost, FN2 Face and Eye Detection, FN3 Photometry, and FN4 Focus Mode. Now, I have also set the left command dial to be default exposure comp when in manual mode. That way, I can control the shutter speed with the rear dial and aperture with the front dial when I set the lens aperture to auto. And finally, in order to use the swipe functions, go down to touchscreen settings. Set camera touchscreen to on and touch function to on. Okay, so now that you have seen my settings, let's go over some demo custom profiles I have assigned for the C1 and C2 tabs. So most of the settings I have for my C1 and C2 are very similar. The main differences are primarily to do with my film simulation settings and my autofocus settings. So let's break it down. I'm going to change the dial to C1. For C1, I created a profile for my high contrast black and white street photography. I mainly like to shoot human subjects in motion, but I love a side of architecture. In my IQ settings, I have my custom film simulation black and white high key set. In the AF+MF settings, I changed the focus mode to AFC and the AF mode to zone, as I don't want to spend too long moving the focus box around. The face and eye detection is set to off, and for photometry, I have it set to spot metering. This will allow me to acquire focus faster, albeit sacrificing a little bit of focus acquisition consistency. Now moving on to C2. For C2, I have used my custom urban mood film simulation. The focus mode is set to AFS and the AF mode is single point. Face detection is turned off and photometry is set to multi. I have also changed the IS mode to shooting plus motion to ensure that there is minimum chance that the camera will go below a shutter speed that will not capture motion properly. Do note that you can only select this IS mode if face detection is turned off. Otherwise, you will only have continuous and shooting options only. This custom setting is a great starting point for everything else that isn't black and white and fast-paced. If I want to change film simulations on the fly, I can do so with the left command dial, and since I have highlight and shadow tones and dynamic range mapped to my Q button, I can quickly tweak these settings on the fly to suit my environment. So there you have it. I hope this video has helped you get a better understanding of how to customize your Fujifilm X-S10. Make sure to share this video with anyone you know who is just starting out with this camera, and most importantly, have fun with the camera. Until next time.